Welcome to episode 9 of The Religion Punk. My name is Beth, and I'm here with my co-host, the Dr. DARF. In this episode, we're going to continue talking about the 10 Commandments from episode 8. Except in this episode, we're going to do more of a breakdown. It's going to be more of a conversation instead of just a back and forth interview as we typically do. So we look forward to sharing this discussion with you. And as we get into the 10 Commandments here, we're going to talk about how serious we do take the 10 Commandments. So I want to break it down to, especially for those that have maybe never read the commandments, just briefly explaining it. So you have Commandment 1. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. And that really is in reference to like the paganisms, like the false gods. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, what Jesus said, in the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. In other words, there's only one God. There's no room for other gods. We even read in places in Scripture where God says, I am a jealous God. That's one of the main principles then to, begin with the commandments. There's only one God. And that was the problem with paganism, was the many gods come into play. And then the contrast between paganism and the sexual relations that they had and perversion and all of that and child sacrifices that were made to other gods, all of those things were going on in the backdrop of God calling out his people and saying, I am the Lord your God. I am the one who brought you out of Egypt. It wasn't any other God. And so, therefore, I have declared, you shall have no other gods before me. Now, what becomes problematic in the history of the Old Testament and the history of the Bible is you have the people, Israel, God's chosen people, and they come to God and then they pull away from God. You get into the Chronicles, some of those books like Chronicles, and you have these kings, and so did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And so was good in the eyes of the Lord. And so, in just a few verses, it summarizes a whole kingdom of this guy was a real mess and he was evil. And we're going to write his name down. When God gives this command that you shall have no other gods before me, it shows the heartbreak of God and the struggle that God has with his people. And this is where it comes down to the point to where the New Testament is in with Christ. The reality that these people are not keeping all of these laws that we have. So what do? Well, the people need a savior to atone for their sins. And so then that's where Jesus, comes in on the scene. In a book called The Day America Told the Truth, it's by James Patterson and Peter Kim. I don't think it's by James Patterson, the author that writes all of those scary books, those novels. I don't think that's the same James Patterson, but they lay down the law of postmodern times. They observe that today there's absolutely no moral consensus at all. Everyone is making up their own personal moral codes, their own 10 commandments. Patterson and Kim proceed to list what they call the 10 real commandments, the rules that, according to their surveys, people actually live by. And these rules include the following: I don't see the point in observing the Sabbath. I will steal from those who won't really miss it. I will lie when it suits me, so long as it doesn't cause any real damage. I will cheat on my spouse. After all, given the chance, he or she will do the same. I will procrastinate at work and do absolutely nothing about one full day in every 5. These new commandments, they write, are based on moral relativism, the belief that we are free to make up our own rules based on our own personal preferences. The law is not something that comes from God, but something we come up with on our own. And our laws usually conflict with God's laws. It's not surprising that Patterson and Kim call the 10 real commandments generally violate the laws that God gave to Moses. Remember the Sabbath. 6 days shalt you labor and do all thy work. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness, and so forth. We become a law unto ourselves. One could hope to find that the situation is somewhat better in the church. Surely God's own people honor one permanent, objective standard of God's law, yet the church is full of worshipers who do not even know the Ten Commandments, let alone know how to keep them. This problem was documented in a recent report from the Princeton Religion Research Center. The headline read, "Religion is gaining ground, morality is losing ground." And the report showed how recent increases in church attendance and Bible reading have become offset by the simultaneous decline in morality. Now, I share this. I know that it mentioned a whole lot of commandments that we're going to kind of go through here, but I think that it gives you a little bit of an approach how the Ten Commandments that we're about to describe have been disregarded, thrown by the wayside. They don't matter to us because we're going to live however we want to live.
But that's a good point. I mean, I think that our listeners should know that there is a thing called free will, but there's also a thing called consequences. So yeah, you could do whatever you want and write whatever 10 commandments you want to live by, but that doesn't mean that you're going to make it into the arms of God. So we're looking at the first commandment, and we're looking at that you shall have no other gods before me. And as you were mentioning earlier, that paganism was a pretty big deal actually in the Bible, but we see it in Genesis. We see that the flood was a result of paganism kind of taking over because people were worshiping other idols other than God. And we see it again in Revelation, the very last chapter of the Bible, where one of the letters to the seven churches talks about idols. And I think even one of those seven churches was near, what is it, the ancient, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, which is Artemis. And she was a god, worshipped by pagans. So it amazes me how paganism really is all over the place in the Bible. I think that you gave me a book. Well, I know you gave me a book because I don't know how else I would have gotten it, but it actually talks about paganism and Christianity, and it's a very side-by-side comparison and talks about paganism throughout the Bible. It's a fascinating book. So I hope at one point or another we'll be able to actually talk about paganism as an episode. But going into, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is heaven above, or that is the earth beneath, or that is the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those who hated me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. What does that mean?
There again, it goes right along with the first one, that there's only one God. You're not to worship any other God. Well, part of that worship is these carved images. If you look at some of the study of the gods and goddesses, and a lot of times you can find some really good examples of that in some of these museums. Well, even God's people, the golden calf. Moses goes up into the mountain, they think he's lost. They think he's dead, so they're going to his brother and they say, we need a God. So they get all the gold they can together, and Aaron, and they put this golden calf, and the people begin to worship. This is the God who's brought us out of Egypt. It's really a wonder that God didn't just fry them all there, and just take Moses off the mountain and let him start all over with a new obedient people. But that shows God's love, mercy, compassion, that you people are just so ignorant. And so he comes down from the mountain, and they break up this God into dust, and they throw it into the water and it becomes mud, and he makes the people drink it. That's a pretty interesting story in itself as well. But there again, carved images can still be it can still be a representation of anything that we could have in our life that we put in place of God. I mean, I'm a person that one of the loves of my life has been to play the guitar. It frustrates me in my older age because I got diabetic neuropathy and I'm having a hard time playing the guitar anymore. But I bought guitars, all my life, and I've had this idea that, oh, that's a guitar I'd like to have. And they make a Gretsch electric guitar. It's a white Falcon. It's white. It's beautiful. It has gold on it. So much for guitars. But if that becomes something that's so dear to me, then really it becomes an idol. Becomes a point to where, if a young person, if they idolize a particular superstar, whoever it may be. They have posters on of that person, in on their wall of their bedroom, and they have all the memorabilia, and they have to go to the concerts, and everything that person does and says, and even what really becomes despicable and disgusting is sometimes those people will even tell their fans how to vote. I don't like Donald Trump, so let's vote for Biden. Or I don't like Biden, so let's vote for Trump. Well, our superstar celebrity person, they're for this person, so I am too. It's amazing the craziness that happens in our country. But again, some of it comes back to what we idolize, what we put in our life that comes before us and God. It may be a set of golf clubs. Well, I can find Jesus out on the golf course. I can appreciate God out there on the golf course. Yes, you can. However, if golfing becomes more important to you than your relationship with God, then there you go. So that's a good application, I think, of that carved images. And
And my interpretation, I have kind of more of a modern interpretation of this, I think, because there's the song The Sound of Silence that Disturbed did a cover of.
yeah,
I can't remember it. Simon and
Garfunkel. Yeah.
Garfunkel, yeah, Simon and Garfunkel song that they're actually referencing technology, TV, media, and that we really idolize some of that stuff, and especially technology. I mean, I think that our generation, our country idolizes technology more than we should. Who's going to get the latest iPhone? And when it comes out, you get it, and then I'll turn around 6 months later, and the next iPhone comes out, and I got to have it. And so to me, I always kind of get Commandment 1 and Commandment 2 sort of in the same boat because, you shall not have a God above God. He shall be your only God. And then you're not going to idolize things, which could also be other smaller gods as well. God does not deny that there are other gods out there. I mean, we see that. Why would he make that the first commandment if he said, I am going to be the God and I will be your one and only God? But he's not denying that there's not other ones out there. So I've always been a little bit mind blown over those first two and the idea that there are other gods. Going into Commandment 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. And I'm going to admit, I am probably the one out of all the commandments, this is the one that I struggle with the most because of my generation has come up with that term OMG, that it's almost the slang is so embedded in our vocabulary that it just slips out so much. And I always have to stop myself when I get into that OMG, that it's almost coming to the point of you have to think, how do I actually explain how I feel without saying OMG? I know that's actually one that it usually offends you as well.
Yeah, and I was noticing a comment by Jack S. Deere. That's Deere, and he writes in the Bible Knowledge Commentary. But his reference here is to misuse God's name means literally to lift it up to or attach it to emptiness. This command forbids using God's name in profanity, but it includes more. The third commandment, a directive against using God's name in a manipulative way. His name is not to be used in magic or to curse someone. Today, a Christian who uses God's name flippantly or falsely attributes a wrong act to God has broken this commandment. Now, that's a pretty good, strict definition there. I have a lot of, I think I have a lot of tolerance, when it comes to profanity and language and, people using slang and all of that sort of thing. And generally, I'll kind of let a lot of things kind of go when it comes to that kind of use of language. However, when you get into the God language, that just makes my skin crawl. When I hear somebody, say God and then they use the word damn, that just, or someone says, oh, and then they use the word Christ, or you might say the OMG. All of those kind of references just kind of make my skin crawl. And I even remember years ago what one of my pastors said one time, that the way that he responded sometimes to somebody saying, well, God blank this and God blank that and God blank that. And this pastor would say, oh, you know him too, do you? Just to kind of make them stop and, at times, and we don't understand it.
So we have Commandment 4. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor the female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. And we just talked about this in an episode or two back, where going to church. So remembering the Sabbath day, is that meant to go to church?
I'm really kind of on the line here because I'm a preacher, a pastor, that certainly believes in going to church. But I think sometimes people get caught up in the legalism of even that, thinking that, well, I went to church and therefore I did my duty. I pleased God today. And one of the things that the Sabbath is all about is this thing called rest. So I think it is probably sacred for you to go home and take a nap on Sunday afternoon as it is for you to sit in a worship service on Sunday morning. I think that those things go hand in hand. And I think that again is two reasons we might think that God made the Sabbath. God made the Sabbath, first of all, so we'd think of him and put him first in our lives. And then the second thing, so that we would get the rest that we needed, so that we would be ready to go back into our work week. Now, what becomes really sticky for our society today is people work shifts, around the clock, and people may work 2 or 3 jobs and things, that sometimes working where they cannot be in church at 9:30 on a Sunday morning, or 10:30 or 11 o'clock, or whenever that church service is. And so, and sometimes religious folk beat up other religious folk about, and you're sinning by working on Sunday. Well, what day of the week do you want to choose to put God first? Going to be on a Sunday, or is it going to be a Monday? What day are you going to get rest? Is that going to be Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, whatever day that is? There is no agreement. I mean, the Jews have their idea what the Sabbath is. The Seventh day Adventist religion, they don't worship on Sunday, they worship on Saturday, because they believe that that is the true Sabbath. But the history of the Christian church amongst Protestants is that we worship on Sunday. It goes back to our Lord being resurrected on the third day, and that becoming, our day of worship. And so we've got all kinds of opinions all across the board as to what the Sabbath is, how should the Sabbath be kept. And I think that really, in the eyes of God, we probably miss the mark because we forget God in the process, or we forget that rest that we really need.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest point right there, is it doesn't say what day, but it does say that you should have a day set aside for rest, for reflection with God. And so I think that's the most important part to me, is that it doesn't matter if it's on a Tuesday. I used to work evenings and nights, and so going to church on Sundays was hard. And so I went to Bible studies on Fridays. So I think that's the important part of that commandment. Commandment 5, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. I know a lot of people in my generation struggle with that, because we have this war of the boomers and the snowflakes and honoring your parents.
And of course, there again, it was showing respect to father and mother. I think Jesus had a man that came up and said, I will follow you, but first I got to go and bury my father, and then I will come and follow you. And then part of the background of that was that maybe that father wasn't dead and they were going to wait till that father was dead, and then they would follow Jesus. And that's where you get that phrase where Jesus comes. Some of the hard sayings of Jesus was said, let the dead bury their own dead. But the idea of honoring father and mother, it is very critical in our society. There's so much estrangement in relationships between fathers and mothers. And I mean, just this past week, I saw a news clip about some boy in, I think, Omaha who shot his father. We've got so many occurrences of that, of children that rise up and kill their parents, commit murder.
So we have commandment number 6, you shall not murder, which seems pretty self-explanatory, really. I mean, that doesn't really need explanation, but if you have anything you want to add, go ahead.
It seems pretty much cut and dry. Thou shalt not kill, I think is what some translations say, or you shall not murder. Yet people try to take that to the extreme of anywhere from a soldier on a battlefield or somebody swatting a fly. You murdered that fly if you swatted it, killed it on the wall. So, but I think it's, basically a principle. And when you consider that throughout our world today that, we have lots of murders take place, it's really sad.
Yeah, I think for me, the one that bothers me the most is abortion. You shall not murder, and so people assume that fetus is not an actual human, and therefore that's not murdering, but I feel like it's murder from the very first day.
Well, and the contradictions that people, that are pro-life get faced with is they say, well, okay, you say that we shouldn't kill the unborn, which, I stand with you. I'm very much pro-life myself. And then they say, well, how can you condone taking a prisoner, and executing them?
Yeah.
How can you do that? Because isn't that also murder? There again, it kind of comes back to the laws of our land. And if our laws say that that's a punishment, that if you go out and kill somebody and state law says, they're entitled to be executed, then I guess they're entitled to be executed. There again, I think it's, pretty much a basic principle for that matter.
Yeah, and as basic as it is, it's actually, as we were just now talking about, it sounds very complicated. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could talk about in regards to murder and death. So for commandment number 7, you shall not commit adultery, which also seems very straightforward. Commandment number 8, you shall not steal. And we were kind of talking about this earlier, that whole idea of stealing, the Robin Hood theory.
Yeah.
Is it okay to steal for the poor and from the rich?
Well, and you hear stories all the time of people that steal office supplies,
Yeah.
I mean, hey, what's a ream of paper? They're not going to miss this ream of paper or these, pens, and especially, I guess, maybe if somebody gets fired, they start clean out your desk. Well, okay. Half of what's in my desk belongs to the company, but they're not going to miss it because it's a big company. So we have all kinds of ways that we try to rationale what is it actually stealing.
And for commandment 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. That one is a little bit more confusing. So what does that mean, bear false witness?
Well, bearing false witness, I think, would be giving a false testimony, obviously. We could probably very much put it into application today about people, that try to get ahead, maybe even in the corporate world, by which, they cheat, they'll lie, they'll do everything they can to get ahead. And even if it means, making up some trash, about their opponent. We also see that in politics, too.
Yeah.
When it comes election time, we, the public, never really know what is truth. Basically, one person, will bash and trash another person, and then that person will turn around, bash and trash them. And it's almost kind of like sometimes we use that term demonize, where you demonize someone. But the only problem is sometimes when you get involved in that you demonize, it's pretty hard to get down and roll in that mud pit, without getting muddy yourself. There again, there's a lot of different applications even to the point to where people that gossip, and that's probably one of the great sins that occurs even within our churches today, is you have these groups of people. We want to call them old ladies, but that's really stereotyping. It's not really fair to old ladies. It could be old men or whoever. Most of the time, those things are very harmful, and many times they just come out as outright lies.
So maybe to modernize this phrasing a little more, we could say, "Thou shalt not spread fake news."
Fake news, yeah.
Fake news. And then finally, for the commandment 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. And one of the interesting things that I had as a follow-up question for this commandment is, we kind of have some slight differences between the Exodus chapter 20 verses 2 through 17 version of the commandments, and then Deuteronomy's chapter 5 verses 6 through 21, and then, which we've kind of talked about different translations, but this is within the Bible itself. And so there's that, no, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, and that's the Exodus version, and then in Deuteronomy it's wife. That was just something that I found interesting, is what is the commandment 10 really telling us?
My understanding is to put this into historical perspective, and that is, Moses goes up to the mountain, Moses comes down with the mountain, he has the commandments, and basically those commandments are given to the people. A lot of things we need to understand too, that they didn't have, paper and pen and copy machines and all of that during that particular day. So much of what occurred within the Bible that the Bible talks about was spread by oral tradition, passed down from one generation to another. Now, when you come to the book of Deuteronomy, I don't think that is so much the case, because I believe that Moses is credited for writing the first 5 books of the Bible. It just kind of comes down to where it's an expansion, maybe, of what that law can be about. Now, for us today, it may kind of be silly. What does it mean to covet? Well, it means to desire, to lust after, something that somebody else has. And they throw in the wife, and they throw in the servant, and they throw in the ox and the donkey. I don't own a donkey. I don't own an ox. I wouldn't be very lustful to acquire somebody's ox or their donkey. So, that kind of stuff doesn't really maybe seem applicable. Living in the United States of America, we are consumers, and there's always something better on the horizon. That if you get a cell phone or something and you find out a month later that model went out and there's a new model coming, and we want the new model, and it's like with the Game Boys and the PlayStations and things like that. We got PlayStation. I think I have a PlayStation 3, but I think they've got 5 now, don't they? Yeah. And I can see, even though the people on the podcast, I could see you're smiling and nodding your head. So maybe you own a PlayStation 5.
I only wish I had that kind of money.
Oh yeah. So, but the thing is, give it a year, so you'll be able to find that PlayStation 5, because PlayStation 6 will be out. So there again, I think that it may be one of the most misunderstood commandments.
Well, and I'm glad that you also mentioned the historical background of this, because I think we do have to read that more historically, because reading it, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, can also link back to the commandment, you shall not commit adultery. Yes. But we have to think that back then, women were actually property.
Yes.
So we have to think that this is actually just talking about the property and not just a second reminder of committing adultery.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, even Jesus, corrected the Pharisees, about thou shalt not commit adultery. And yet at the same time, he was, I think, acknowledging that people could file divorce for burning food or something like that. I was thinking, how seriously should we take commandments? Obviously, they are a great moral guide for human behavior, Christian behavior. But at the same time, we kind of hope that out in the world, even people that are not believers in God or atheists or people of other religions or whatever it is that people go by as a moral code, that somehow their moral code will line up with the same things that we believe about you shall not murder and you shall not lie and you shall not steal and so forth. But I was thinking of a scripture in Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Just reflecting on the first part of that, because I think there again, we have such a debate in our world today. We are, as a country, United States, are so divided by the political parties, and one political party gets into office and the people in the opposition, cry out, that's not my president and I'm not going to acknowledge that person. And then another election comes by and it flip flops, which that's kind of what it did this last time. You still got probably 80, 100 million people maybe in this country. They're mad because they lost the election. But at the same time, we have to look at the values of our politicians and we have to hold them accountable. It gets really scary sometimes. Well, when you're talking about the subject of abortion that we just mentioned, that you don't believe in abortion and I don't believe in abortion. And one of the personal things of that I don't know if we shared before was at the time that your mother was pregnant with you, she'd already had your brother. And there was like 11 months span in there. And the doctors, were concerned that maybe you wouldn't be normal and the pregnancy would have problems and all kinds of things. And the doctor came up to us. He happened to be a Southern Baptist. And so this was not his belief system, but because he was sworn to uphold the laws of medical science and so forth, that I have to give you this option. Would you like to terminate this pregnancy? Of course, your mom and I, like I say, we don't believe in that. And it was very easy for us to say, no, we're not going to do that because we made that decision. Here you are. There again, people justify that. We see that as evil. We see that as sinful, but yet we live in a world where, no big deal. If you don't want the baby, just go get rid of it. That's where I think in looking at the Old Testament and the commandments, we have to find what is applicable. What's going to make us better Christians? What's going to draw us closer to God? That ought to be things that we can be guided by the Spirit of God if we seek out God to guide us.
Which I think is a great way to end this episode, is just that the commandments, as old as they are still very relevant today. And we see that even in our own laws in our country. We see them in laws in other countries. I think that's the most amazing thing about the commandments is we as a world can't seem to agree on many things. If not, well, there's very few things we can't agree on, but yet we can agree on most of these commandments being commandments, whether they're religious or not.
To make us a better society of people.
Yes. As always, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and we look forward to sharing our next upcoming project, which will actually be covering the book of the Revelation. So we're going to take a stab at actually doing a bit of a chapter study, and we look forward to sharing that with you.